What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here, and welcome once again to the Nebula Music Podcast. I am very excited because today I am bringing you something a little bit different. One of the things that I'm going to start doing on this show is, yes, I'm still going to be bringing on, completely botched that word right there. I'm going to be bringing on some very cool up-and-coming artists that I believe you should be aware of. Today is definitely no exception to that. I have John of the Black Watch joining me. His story is very fascinating because he's been in the music industry and been doing some really cool stuff in the industry for a very, very long time, a lot longer than I have. And I got the opportunity to check out his history, to check out his career, and to really learn a lot about Los Angeles and the culture of this city and how it's affected the music industry. And it's just crazy because I feel like it's something that, especially in my generation as musicians, it's something that we've learned through watching movies or hearing some historical accounts from other people. That's really how we understand how LA and the music culture has changed. But I feel honored because I feel like I have a first-person account on what actually happened and how the music industry was behaving at the time. And it's just really cool to see how it's been evolving and how it's affected careers for certain musicians and how it's changed to what it is today. And so I don't want to bore you guys with a lot of intro talk. I would much rather we get right into the interview, but I just wanted to go ahead and take this moment just to let you guys know that this is something I want to do more often. I want to go ahead and bring on some really cool people that are up and coming, that are going to be doing some cool things in the very near future. That way I can give you guys an introduction and let you guys know that, hey, you guys should check these guys out because they're doing some really cool things, and I think you guys would definitely love their story. So anyways, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into the interview. All right, what is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here again. Thanks again for joining me on the Nebula Music Podcast. As you guys know, I love doing this. This is one of my favorite things to do on the planet. I love talking to people. I love talking to influential musicians, anybody who's doing something cool in the industry. I love to get inside their brain and just understand what it is that they do. And today, it's a bit special for me. This is going to be a bit of a different episode for you guys because normally I sort of have some people that you guys have heard before, or there's like a sort of up and comer in the sense of like in LA's music culture. But today I have someone that I think is actually legitimately special. We got introduced just a couple of months ago through a mutual friend, and I got introduced to their music. I got introduced to their story, and I don't know, their tagline that really caught my eye is that this is a band, one of the most underrated musical groups in Los Angeles that you should have probably heard of, but for whatever reason at this point, they're starting, you're definitely about to hear them, but for whatever reason up until now, you haven't heard enough about them. So without spoiling too much, because I don't want to tell your story, man, I'm just excited to have you on the show, man. My man John Andrew Fredrick is on the show. He is the leader of the Black Watch. Am I mistaking on that, my man?
No, you're absolutely correct, Eddie.
Welcome to the show, John. As I mentioned, hopefully I gave you a good enough intro. I try my best to give everybody a really good intro, my man. But without kind of spoiling anything for everyone, I really just want to take my time and just explore your rich history, man. John, why don't you go ahead and just walk me through a little bit about where you're from, because I know you're not from LA, and then maybe like tell me a little bit of like how you guys started in music and your history sort of from that, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, sure. I grew up in Santa Barbara, being madly in love with both sports and the Beatles. And I broke my leg when I was 10 years old. I'll let other people do the math on the year that the White Album was released. And the break was so bad that I had to spend almost an entire year in bed. And my parents were so cool and uncool, I thought at the same time, that they didn't let me watch more than an hour of television per day. So what to do with my time? And I just started to play guitar, so I propped a little Silvertone guitar on my cast, and I started writing songs when I was 10 or 11. And in imitation of the Beatles, and I guess you could say there's a way in which I'm still chasing that dream of trying to write like the Beatles that will forever, recede into the distance, or evaporate, like almost like a ghost,
I feel like that's
because
like
it's an
every songwriter's
impossibility.
endeavor. You know what I mean? Every songwriter wants to
Yeah,
chase that. You're not alone.
right. Well, I mean, then the record we have coming out early next year, or in February and March, is called "Brilliant Failures." So you could use that as a trope
Hmm.
or metaphor for the entirety of our career. But yeah, so I mean, I didn't play music seriously until after I finished. I was a graduate student. I finished my PhD in English literature, and then I tried to write a novel about a year I spent in England in between undergrad and grad school, and I realized that writing prose was so difficult that I could write 5 songs in the time that it took me to write, um, one page of prose. And one of my
By prose,
students,
do you mean like a book page? Is that what you?
fiction, yeah, fiction, imaginative, writing. And I was still teaching at UCSB, and I had a student who was a drummer who kept turning me on to all kinds of really good music that I was just starting to get into. I missed the whole in Santa Barbara. We missed the whole punk thing, so we kind of embraced post punk. So this
Did it
guy,
just like graze over Santa Barbara? You guys were just on your own little bubble.
I mean, it's still. I think it's too conservative. It's too flowery and hippy dippy. Still, just too much of an allegiance to that. That folky acoustic Jackson Brownish, Cat Stevens kind of stuff, or into the that sort of thing. And just there. I mean, if there were, and also if you're in graduate school, your time is really it's taxed by so much work. So I didn't have that much time until I finished my PhD to start investigating music. And everybody needs someone to turn them on to stuff. And this is of course predates any of the file sharing streaming sort of thing. So mixtapes still held sway. Were king or queen. And so this friend and drummer friend started making me tapes of the Cocteau Twins and the Smiths and early REM and the Lucy Show and etc. And actually that band, the Lucy Show from London by way of Canada, they came to Santa Barbara and I saw them, and I started the Black Watch the next day. I was really, really inspired by this band that's to this day I still worship and love. They're sort of like a little bit Bunnymen-ish, a little bit Cure-ish, a little bit Beatles-ish. And then 30 years later, here we are with I think 17 full LPs and 4 EPs, et cetera, et cetera. And that's an overview of the Black Watch and my story.
It's a
It's
very good
way it's
overview.
way more sordid and delicious at the same time than that. Certainly in the details, but that should give you a sort of inkling or idea of what it's all been about.
Yeah, man. And I appreciate you narrowing it down like that for me, just because I'm pretty sure I would not have done as good a job as you to describe your history in just in such a concise way. And there's so much to unpack there. Now, by the way, for you guys listeners who may not be from California, or even if you are from California, Santa Barbara is this little town that's about 60 to 7 miles north. I'm sorry, 60 to 70 miles north of Los Angeles. And it's like a beach town. It's a very, I'm not even sure how big it is. I've been there many times, but I've never gotten the opportunity to actually explore it fully. But I do know that it's kind of its own little hub. You know what I mean? Like it isn't necessarily different from LA, in my opinion. It's a beach town, but it feels like you're in a different place slightly, even though you're relatively close to Los Angeles. I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like that's maybe
No,
why.
it's very much a college town, a beach town, a town for exceedingly rich people.
Yep.
The Montecito, that's just a trifle south of Santa Barbara proper, is one of the most affluent communities in the world. Up there with
Wow.
Monte Carlo or whatever. So
Lots of
there's a
vineyards
lot
and
of
all that.
money. There's not a ton. I didn't find that there was really a ton of ambition there. It's one of the reasons why, that occasioned my move to Los Angeles. Lots of people. Well, another was the flip of the coin. I was either going to move to San Francisco, where my oldest, closest, best friend and college roommate had moved, it was either Santa Barbara or Los Angeles, and it landed on head, so I headed south. But Santa Barbara is greatly different. It's almost as though LA doesn't exist there. There's something of a lotus land, mentality there, because it really is kind of ideal and absolutely beautiful. I mean, the mountains just come right down to the sea, and it's terribly expensive, and people are, terribly the same in lots of ways, but yet at the same time, it used to be. It's not the case anymore. It used to be such a vibrant intellectual, like so many solid college towns are, university towns, with great bookstores and people talking about ideas and smoking cloves while drinking a straight espresso with lemon rimming the cup or whatever. It was a great place to be a bookish intellectual sort of person and a beach person, and a sports person too, because the weather's so lovely. But for as far as being a musician goes, the people that I met and started the band with, even though they've gone on to do really, really great things later on, they took their, sort of molasses time about doing it. And it seemed like people's ambition was to do enough to stay in Santa Barbara. And having grown up there, it was time for me to get out after, you know, growing up there and then going to graduate school and hanging on teaching at UCSB for a couple of years. So I headed to Los Angeles thinking, that I would find much more dedicated, driven people like myself, almost psychotically driven. If you don't want to put too fine a point on it, I am kind of maniacally creative and ambitious. So, and that did turn out to be the case. I've met so many people in Los Angeles, and maybe this has been your experience as well as a musician, that the community here of people, once you filter out the posers and the self-serving ones, that there are incredible producers and engineers and other musicians
Oh man,
to work with.
I'm
It's
glad you
really
brought
such
that
a
up.
rich scene. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up because there's a lot to uncover right there. I mean, there's so much I want to explore, which, by the way, I love Santa Barbara. I think it's a very beautiful town, but I feel like almost everywhere in the world, when you have the metropolises, that's kind of where a lot of the cultures mesh, and that's where historic things happen. At least I would argue that a lot of the times that's kind of, especially for music and art, a lot of it happens where the cultures mesh. And so you kind of need to go out of your comfort zone if you are from some of those areas. Sometimes not, but I think in your experience it was that. But one of the things that you said that really piqued my curiosity, which, by the way, for those of you guys who don't know, I feel like I've talked about it many times, but actually, John, I'm from Los Angeles. I was born and raised here in southern Los Angeles, and I moved quite a bit around in the actual city. But meeting musicians, LA has always been this town where people are constantly coming, going in and out. I feel like there's a few towns like that in the United States for musicians where they come for a couple months and they move to the next town and back and forth, back and forth. LA has been a pretty much commercial spot for a lot of musicians. But because I'm from here, oddly enough, you don't meet many musicians that are local LA people. You know what I mean? Like there's some for sure, but most of the time you'll find people that are not from here. They're from New York, Nashville, Detroit, anywhere else. And to me, because I'm a local, I never had to experience what it was like to pack my bags and move to LA because it means it's my home. And so I'm genuinely curious because you said the posers, right? Everyone always says this and everyone always has their own version of their story of being enamored with LA and the people, but then very quickly realizing that because everyone's a dreamer, you kind of have to, I don't know, you have to filter out the people that bullshit and then filter out the people that bullshit with the people that actually matter. And so for you, let me ask you this, if you don't mind me asking, because I know some people do, what year did you come out here and what was your experience like when you first started realizing, hey, wait a minute, maybe some of these people I'm meeting aren't absolutely 100% legitimate, if that makes sense?
I moved here in 1989, and I'd already found a bass player who I'd met through BAM magazine or some ad or something, who said, "Look, I have your first record," because I'd released a record when we were in Santa Barbara, and this guy Todd Banks said, I'll be your bass player. I love your music. I love your writing. Let's find a drummer and go from there. And there's something to speak to that idea of being an expatriate from your own town, which you've not experienced, but you're still young. You can do it. There's time for you. If you want to, haul off and go try and live in Spain, where there's a great music scene too. There's a real romantic element of suffering for your art, especially if you move somewhere. And I knew two people, perhaps one of whom, I can't say that I knew him, was the guy who said he'd play bass in the Black Watch, because I was going to keep the name because I thought I had momentum going, just because
it's a good name,
put
by
out
the
a
way.
record.
It's a very good name.
Oh, thank you. It's meant to pay homage in a lowercase way to the fact that I'm Scottish and that I of heritage, and then I used to love bagpipes and all things military martial stuff. Now that's changed a little bit, that I've become such a super peacenik, and also because the labels don't seem to be able to sort out the difference between my band and the bagpipers on Spotify. So when people go, "Oh, I really want to hear you. I've heard that you write this. You guys play psychedelic jangly pop." I go, "Okay, if you're on Spotify, look out, because you're gonna our stuff is mixed in with the bagpiping regiment." So there you go. But when I moved here, Eddie, I went out so as not to be intimidated, because I'm somebody from a relatively small town. My first time, LA was a really forbidding thing as a provincial kid who grows up, in Santa Barbara and comes down here occasionally. I would come for a Laker game or to see a play at the Amundsen or something, and it would be so intimidating, so vast, so many people. But I started going to some gigs just to see what the climate, was like, what the musical milieu was all about. And once I saw a number of bands playing clubs like the Club Lingerie or the Coconut Teaser, I thought, they're fine, they're good, they're okay. But I needn't think that just because they're playing LA clubs, they're incredible. So that helped not to be so very intimidated, and and just start to be social and meet people and ask around and see if you can find it. You being a drummer, that like a drummer can't make a band, but it can break, as in breaking it in two. You have to have a really good drummer. And it's so funny. I always remember the joke that Linda Ronstadt, who's au courant right now because of the biopic or documentary on Linda Ronstadt, she always said, if I could find a drummer that I could live with who was really good, I'd probably marry him. Well, she's not married yet, and she's something like 72 years old.
She's still looking, huh?
She's still looking. She's still auditioning. Which goes to show you that how crucial it is to find a really a great drummer that you can get on with. As well. It's just because I started off as I drummed when I was a kid, and my parents, when I sold the drum kit when I was, I think, 16, my parents had a party. They were so happy that I was just going to do acoustic guitar, because I made such a ruckus playing drums to the Beatles.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, actually. So you've been out here since 1989, and you started socializing with musicians. This was around the time where, well, and I want to ask you this because I feel like you would know, because you were here and I was just being born. So
yeah, right,
I wasn't very much aware.
You're young.
Well, the idea is, okay, so there's always been this debate amongst promoters and people in the music industry in general. Talk about what it was like to be in Los Angeles, to be involved in the music scene during the 80s and the transition from the 80s to the 90s. And there's always this debate of when was it actually popping? Was it more in the 80s? Was it more in the 90s? And I feel like the consensus has been that the 80s is kind of the one that people romanticize. You think of the Viper Room, you think of all these iconic locations, and you think of all these movie moments of back in the 80s. But for me, I feel like there was a bit of a huge music movement still happening way through the 90s. And I honestly feel like it might have been bigger, more diverse, I guess is the better term, than in the 80s. And so for me, what was your experience like, or what did you notice when you first moved out here, maybe within the first year or two? what was predominantly popular in the music scene for musicians? What were most people into? What were they doing? What was like the norm that a musician would do when they would move here?
That's such a hard question for me to answer because we never felt like we were part of any scene whatsoever,
Really?
and that we were friends with bands that that were like-minded in that respect, who thought, "Oh, we're the non-pariah. There's nothing that's like us. We're not part of any movement, etc." Because this is, mind you, this is the post Paisley Underground kind of three
Yeah.
o'clock, Dream Syndicate stuff. So I think, as to your question about the 90s, it was really one of these things where anything went at all. If you wanted to have elements of, jam bandishness, or to try to throw in some beats that were smacked of, hip hop, that was fine too. But we were so busy recording and rehearsing to try to just get better and better that we didn't. I can't say that if the choice came between, going out and being part of a scene and networking and that kind of thing, and writing and rehearsing with the band, I certainly would have, chosen the latter. So I'm not the right person to ask about, properly about what was going on. Of course, I went to see bands, but it's sort of like it transcended, an LA scene. We went to see things that we'd read about in the NME and Melody Maker. I mean, that was our scene, had more to do with what was coming over from England, as a recovering Anglophile, with, something I'll never get over. Loving the music, English music, Scottish music too, of course, and Irish. Just that that's what I felt most excited about when I had friends who worked at record shops. That was the scene. I befriended people who worked at record shops. I filled in working at record shops as well, because those things were more important to me, and still to this day, than live shows. Of course, we love to play live and love to do gigs, but it's just, I often think that the most important musical, barometer or development, or essence of one, is between you and some headphones, when it's just you listening, to a record, going by. So that's that. It's not to say that we weren't, so that we still aren't, social and, chummy and hail fellow, well met, and all of the above, but I think we were all so busy trying to, by hook or by crook, get studio time, keep enough college gigs going to fund records when we were on tiny labels that would say, okay, here's a pittance of money for recording, and you guys sort out the rest of it. But that was a really good thing, and sorting out, taking off, Friday afternoons to go and play in Berkeley or Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, or wherever, or UCSD, wherever we could. So I think we're so busy trying to keep making things, organizing T-shirts, being our own management, that it was hard for us to be the type of band that was going out seeing music.
Was that rare? Back in, I don't mean to say it, back in in that time.
I mean, it is the distant past now. You're right. It's right for you to say. I mean, especially in light of the fact that the '90s revival, they say, is coming. So yeah,
I feel like we're kind of already starting to enter into that.
Sorry.
I feel like we're already starting to enter that slightly.
Sure. Yeah. We're, Americans are built for nostalgia, and so it's the inevitable next thing, and just it'll be the greatest shock when people start to be nostalgic for the aughts.
I know, which is crazy to think about.
I don't even want to think about that.
Well, back to that question though, was it? It sounds to me like you were describing. It's very obvious that you guys were very much just self-managed, and that it was not. It's not. It sounds to me like it wasn't even out of necessity. There was this sort of passion behind being able to create this vision that you might have not even known exactly what you wanted, but you were just figuring it out, which is why you found a lot of passion recording and being in record stores and being in the studio primarily. and that's why you have 17 albums out, is because you found that passion. But my genuine question is, again, me not being necessarily aware at the time, but it sounds to me like most people in the 90s, the goal was pretty much get on a major, get, categorize yourself with a certain type of style and then go for it, right? And that's why you get so many type of genres in the 90s, but you got so many iconic bands too. But was it a rarity to find a group that would self-manage themselves a lot? You know what I mean? Like, was that weird at the time, or was that strange, or was that the
friends that we had who were on major labels, and there were a quantity of them because we'd often get really good opening slots, and we're opening for the band and hanging out with them, so we'd see them and quiz them about what their world was like. But we always kind of just behaved as though we were a much bigger deal than we ever were, and sort of blustered our way through it. And we just felt like there's no difference between us because we've got the ability to do these things, like do short-term tours or 3-day jaunts up the coast and sell T-shirts and and book our own shows. And we did that because we thought, well, gosh, as long as we're at it and gelling and excited, there is a certain sort of, again, us versus them, in the face of musical adversity. That was we got a lot of momentum out of just going, we have all of this, product and enthusiasm and an exciting live show with a beautiful violinist, gorgeous girl who would sell the T-shirts and the CDs. That was very calculated on our part to have Jana Jacoby, who's now in Rod Stewart's band and has been for the last 20 years or so, to have her, a really pretty girl, sell the stuff so that the indie, boffins and nerds could sit there and meet her and get something signed and drool over and turn over $20 for a CD and a T-shirt or whatever. So, we felt as though we were kind of a bit like bandits getting away with stuff. It isn't that we didn't want a major label deal. We certainly took meetings with major label people who kept telling us all the time, we're keeping an eye on you, send us the next demo. And to the point where it's sort of like we would just think, gosh, you're just waiting for someone to tell you that we're cool, the way in which they, a lot of times there's a lemming-ish kind of mentality, or at least there was at record labels, that there would be a buzz about some band. And we often note too that had we, a number of people I know who landed on Capitol or Warner Brothers, made one record and faded away. The industry got them down, and or they signed a contract that didn't let them make music. I mean, what a calamity that would be, not to be able to do the thing that you're the most passionate for.
How often did that happen, by the way? How often did you see that happen?
It happens more than you think. Certainly to the point where relationships between maybe two principal people in any given band might be strained to the point where they were played off each other, or writing credits. Everything becomes exponentially more histrionic and nervous making too, when somebody's going, okay, look, we're backing this to the tune of quite a lot of thousands of dollars. And so in a way, I mean, I am a kind of sanguine person who always thinks like things do work out for the best. It might seem the end of the world that you got dropped by your little label, or you couldn't, organize a particular show, but things really do work out for the best as long as you keep positive about stuff and inspired, and try to surround yourself with good people, and shun the people who aren't so good.
Well, let me ask you this, John. Answer to that. No. It's interesting because this is a topic that I feel like unless you've gone through it or have been in close proximity to it, like you have, I feel like opinions should be taken very lightly, and there are very few people that I have this discussion with, because I don't know, basically I feel like you kind of need to have some experience. But with you, I'm really curious because the debate of the label, right? The validity of the label, it has been something that's been debated amongst musicians for forever, obviously, but I feel like more so now than ever before. Now, full disclaimer, I don't mind labels whatsoever. I feel like it's a balance, and I feel like going off of what you said, I think what ends up happening to people is they sort of get lost in themselves. They lose themselves when record labels are involved. When I personally believe that if a label is a good thing to do, when you have a good head on your shoulder and you know exactly what you want to do, who you are, and you're able to kind of come to a compromise or a middle ground that's good for you and for the company, that's when you see really cool things happen. But more often than not, what I've seen happen, and it sounds like this is what you're describing too, is you get predominantly young, let's just call it inexperienced musicians. Let's just leave it at that. Inexperienced musicians who get presented with a very great opportunity, and who wouldn't want to take that great opportunity, right? But they haven't matured enough, in my opinion, they haven't matured enough in their sound and who they are as individuals that they don't know how to push back the right way. Sometimes they over push, sometimes they don't push at all, and they get lost in this jumble of what we consider like the whole label thing. So my question to you is then, since you've sort of seen both sides, you've seen some people do really well with a good label, but you've also seen plenty of people get lost and do nothing with a label. What would you say is that sweet sauce then? Because you guys felt like you didn't need to do it, and clearly worked out for you. But for other people that it did work out, what was it that they did that allowed them to shine and use that opportunity and make something better out of it? Did they sell out? Is that something that you firmly believe in, or do you feel like there was a balance?
It's just way too sweeping of a topic to
right?
to answer it in
and
one.
There is no answer, no specific answer, but I'm definitely curious to see what you think.
Well, we've been on lots of little labels and one mini major, and we've had incredible distribution, and we've had minimal distribution. We've run the gamut, / spectrum of all that sort of thing. I mean, my preference is to work with people who are, to be part of a team. I use the metaphor. I play tennis almost every day, and I much rather play doubles than singles these days. Just because it's nice to have somebody there to, not to blame, but to celebrate with when things go really well. So it is a potentially lonely sort of enterprise anyway. If you're not the type of thing that's just friends with 4 or 5 other bands that are always putting on shows and doing parties and that sort of thing. So to have somebody who you feel like is in your corner and doing everything they can, even if they don't see things the way that you do, I think you're onto something. They're referencing the notion of kind of a maturation of understanding that you might create a sort of an artist monster of somebody who just gets whatever they ask for at whatever time. Can lead to a terrible sort of entitled attitude that's just really a huge turnoff. Rock star, typical prototypical rock star kind of behavior that just I don't brook that kind of stuff in my personal life. Somebody comes on, intensely arrogantly or conceitedly, it's just
But what's interesting about that, John? And again, I feel like I can talk to you about this sort of thing. What's interesting about that is I feel like every decade, and again, I haven't been alive long enough to really argue this, but based on history, I feel like every decade there's definitely a good 5 or 10 of those that we can deem, just celebrities that were factory made to be celebrities, And again, I'm not arguing whether that's bad or good. I'm simply saying there are very, very rare occurrences where there are certain artists that have been handpicked from a very young age to just become stars, and they become what, unfortunately, and this is just my straight up opinion, I feel like it's kind of what a lot of the young musicians of that decade end up looking up to these individuals that I'm not going to argue their work ethic or anything, but it's more along the lines of they ignore the fact that the label sort of did that groundwork of getting them to where they're at. And the person, all they had to do was just show up and maybe sing a song and maybe just do whatever. Not saying that that's a good or bad thing. So then my question to you is...
Yeah, there are examples of that, from if I reach in, if you want to name names, you can
Let's
reach
refrain
into
from saying
reach
any
in and
names. Let's just keep it generic. But I get what you're saying.
yeah. I mean, there's a band from Chicago and there's a band from Portland that I would name that I won't name now from from the '90s where you just kind of go, wow, even though these are serious alternative sort of bands, they are also something like a glorified boy girl band that was plucked from semi obscurity. So sure, that does happen, and I'm sure it happens today. I'm sure it's happening right now where somebody goes, oh wow, this actor guy or girl, she can play guitar, mean guitar. Let's form a band around her and capitalize this. And that's fine. It's not going to be something I pay attention to or let it upset me. I have lots of my peers and confreres who let it get to them. It was always just fuming and just going like, and things like the Rolling Stones. Why are they still taking up space in the bin at the record store? Why do they continue to put out music? Why don't they just get out of the way? And you just don't let it get to you, I don't think.
Well, I mean, I like the Rolling Stones, but
I love
my
the
my my
Stones, but I don't know that they need to make any more records.
that definitely up for debate. That's for sure. But my question then becomes: is that harmful for the industry, or does it even matter for someone to be handpicked and formed to being an icon versus what you and maybe myself and other musicians, I would argue most musicians do on the daily, which is work really hard to define their sound. And sometimes they break through and they create something big and massive and they create a great career for themselves. But the question then becomes, is it harmful then to have
I,
those hand-picked
yeah,
instances?
I suppose, but only to those who would play with fire, in a way, that the people who gravitate towards, manufactured bands like fill in the blank that we're not supposed to name, you know, um, I would say the Smashing Pumpkins or the Dandy Warhols, from my era, for example. But just that the mere fact that they get a bunch of they call a bunch of fans who buy into it, that's not really hurting me unless I let it somehow. I mean, it'd be a waste of my time to be resentful of the fact that there's that it's sort of like the musical equivalent to actors. That's not to say that either of those bands in particular aren't without talent and don't have some
Right,
really good
right.
songs, etc. Like those probably aren't very good examples because they're quite good. I have all of the records by both of those groups, for sure. So I'm not really slagging them, but that's kind of an example of somebody who's going to be exploited. And I think that what you hear sometimes, Eddie, is that people who allow themselves to do that, they have that done for them, it becomes like a day job for them. And so the reason, like you get into music, some people do, is not to have a straight job and answer to the man or the woman these days. So, and that'd be kind of ironic that it becomes a role that they have to inhabit or a part that they have to play.
Yeah.
And
So
so, there you go.
did your career ever get to that point where you started feeling like it was a job? Or do you feel like you've
No,
pretty much have kept it free this whole time?
absolutely not, because I always had a job. Um, and I've always maintained that I think it's a really good idea for artists, um, whether you're a painter or you are a composer or a novelist or what have you, that I think it's a really good thing for you to be grounded in the reality of the workaday world. I'm not saying some exhausting job where you have to work 14 hours a day and you're
Right.
too tired to work on music. But I think it's a really good idea to keep in touch with just being productive and being around people and not just the bands that I think that if they just do music and that's all they do, I think they run out of real life experiences to write about, and they end up just writing about what it's like being in a band. All of the songs for the later band like Echo and the Bunnymen are, they're about just what it's like to be a big star from Liverpool, and that's not that interesting or relatable, that's for sure. So I like to hear it when people made some money and made some headway, and they can tour and stuff, but they still maintain a job, somewhere, somehow. They do web design, or they have a podcast, or whether it brings in a whole lot of money. I think it's a really good thing for people who, that would be the, if I was ever mentoring somebody, I would say, don't quit your day job, not for security's sake, but in for reality's sake, and it's going to help you as an artist, um,
Interesting.
somehow.
You know
You
what's
know,
interesting, and I'm glad you bring this up because it's such an interesting thing to argue nowadays, specifically because, there's a million reasons I can give right now, but without, getting too detailed into it, I feel like right now there's this huge, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people, not just in my generation, but just in general, are very enamored with entrepreneur, rock star, I have $1 million, I live on a beach kind of lifestyle, which again isn't necessarily new to my generation. It's been around for a very long time. But very recently I feel like there has been this movement, and I say this because I feel like I sort of bit that bug too years ago. I'm not in that anymore, but I feel like it sort of did cross over into the artist world, and I feel, and that's not to say that that's never been the case. I feel like artists have always sort of been nomads to some degree. Artistry kind of comes with the territory, not kind of being able to wander around and just be creative, right? But I do feel it's interesting that you bring it up, because I feel like right now specifically there is this huge, just, if you're not doing music all the time, if you're not pursuing acting all the time, if you're not pursuing something artistic all the time, and you call yourself an artist, that are you really doing it for real? Like, I feel like that's sort of the vibe that I'm getting from a lot of younger people, a lot of people my age right now that are pursuing it, is that there's this sort of love and this sort of this need to be miserable and like not have a job and just do that 100%, right? And maybe saying miserable isn't the right thing. But my point is, it's interesting that you say that you feel having a job is important because it keeps you grounded and it keeps you, in a weird way, close to reality so that you can have material to write about to inspire you. Is having a job the only way, or like the best way to do that? Or do you feel like maybe there is some sort of balance with what is sort of popular now, which is pursuing your art full time? Is there another way that you can get real life experience that isn't necessarily artist related, but that, you get real life experience through work, through job? Is there another way to get that same life experience without it having to be a job? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think through reading, through just exposing yourself to the great ideas of the world, that there's a way in which, if you're not working at something that forces you to be responsible, and also to, again, have experiences that you can call from and react to, for or against. The idea of just whenever I find out that somebody
Mm.
who is a songwriter isn't necessarily a reader, I think, wow, that's really too bad, because there's a whole world there that you could pull from, that you could glean from, to enrich what you're doing already. I mean, most of the people I know who write songs are greatly interested in poetry, and fiction or nonfiction too. So I just think that's a whole, other world, to explore. So many people neglect that and just and they feel as though it seems as though they think that a voluminous, um, all-encompassing knowledge of music is enough to get by. But I think there's a real reason why somebody like David Bowie, you know, posthumously, published his 100 favorite books or something. I think that it's really, I love it when people in the music business reference literature. I mean, because that's my realm too.
Yeah.
Obviously prejudice
It's
in
always beautiful when you can
literature's
find a
favor like
song
that, but I think it's
that
really
you
crucial to have
genuinely
another thing, or if
feel
they
what they
know
were just
about
talking
painting, or if
about.
they know
Like,
about
and
film,
obviously
and not just they
that's
don't
not to
just
say
watch
that
a
every
bunch of
music doesn't
movies, but
do
they know
that,
something about film
but there are
criticism
definitely
and film history. I
standouts
just think it
where
makes
you
for a
hear it
much
for the
more
first
rich
time and you just
background
feel whatever
to
they're
draw
talking about,
from, to
whatever
be
pain or whatever
more
pleasure
interesting
or happiness that
artist.
they're
Lots of people
experiencing in
can
the
make
song,
music that's not
you
very
can feel it.
interesting
And
but
I
still popular,
definitely
and that's
agree that
for
that
a
comes
dumbed
from
down kind of
legitimate life
audience,
experience or
and God
knowledge,
bless them, let them
whether
listen
from
to
books
whatever
or
they
from
want.
actual
But
experiences.
I'm after, and
I
I'm on the
guess
side of
for
those who
me,
are
my
trying
question to you then
to
would be,
twist the
do you
idioms
feel like
and
your music
still
overall,
write
and
beautiful things,
obviously
but
I'm asking for
also
your own personal
have
opinion, and
have a
I think I know what
have
your answer
a
is going to be,
kind of a
but my question
idiomatic
is, do
different
you feel
stamp
like
to
most
them,
of your
or you
music
can
or
just go
all of
like,
your
oh wow,
music
that person
has
is
been
alluding to
blessed with
something
that,
that's
has been,
deeper than
you've been
just
able to
a
put in
love song
a
or a
lot of that
pop song or
honesty, like
whatever?
almost all your music has that honesty that you were talking about?
I think I like the idea of art as artifice, and I would say that I'm honestly or sincerely duplicitous sometimes in putting on a persona, or inhabiting, or donning a mask somehow. I mean, we've done really super confessional things, and I've also written from the perspective of somebody who's not me at all, like as though I've been
Yeah.
inhabited a character. And I think that that ultimately, the when all's tallied, the most important thing is um, to convey this sense of a consolation to the listener, to just go. And I think this is a roundabout way of saying I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, that that to convey a feeling to the listener like, hey, I've been there, I want you to feel better. If my music, my voice, this melody makes you understand that you're not so
How
terribly alone in
crazy.
the
No,
world, that
honestly,
others
I
have
feel like you struck a
felt
note
this,
there
and
when you
that
were
you can
saying
keep going and not lose
how
hope.
it
I mean, I
makes
think
them think
even though
that they're
some
not
of our stuff
alone.
is very
I mean,
dark
it's
musically,
such a
pessimistic,
basic
etc.,
concept, but I feel
there's
like if you
still an
really think
element
hard
of
enough
hope
about
in
it,
that, to just
it's
go
it's
to
really
speak
the
to the people
concept
who are
behind
really
any type of
downcast, to
art.
go, wow,
Really is
somebody
that
else is really
understanding when
bummed
you
out
relate
as
to
well.
something is
So
it
I'm
relates to
not
that
alone.
feeling,
So
whether
even the
it's
really
happy or sad,
dour,
it's relation,
hopeless
that's
kinds of
where I
gothy,
feel true art
amidst the
cuts
psychedelic
through, is
jangle,
when you
the
strike that
darker
chord
elements of the things that we
with
have, I think
somebody
even
who's
those
been through
can
that
be hopeful
similar
for people.
path
So
or similar
I've often
experience,
thought
and
that,
you don't
just
feel alone. You feel
the
like, wow,
lyrics
this
and the
person,
music
this
are
song gets me.
just
Again,
like
whether it's
the
happy
best
or sad,
poetry,
there's that
are meant as
genuine appreciation
consolations
that
to
comes
people
over
to help
you
them
when you
try
relate.
to
And that comes through
not
honesty and
just
real life experience,
understand
like
but
we were talking about
endure
earlier,
the
which I think
vicissitudes
it's
of
brilliant.
life.
I think it's absolutely
So
brilliant.
I mean, there's my philosophy for you. Well, if
Yeah.
Thank you,
And it
and
kind of
I
and
think
it's kind of
if I ever
a
saw
testament
you, and
to
I
your
hope I
career
do
too.
one
You know,
day,
I
as we
feel
live in the
like
same
you're
town,
definitely someone, based on
that
what
if I
I've
ever
learned from you
saw you
today,
play music,
you're definitely someone who's been through
and
the
I
motions, who's
liked
kind
what
of
you did, and I'm
experienced a
sure I
little bit
would,
of everything,
my first
and you've
thought will
been wise
be,
enough to
"Wow, that
choose
guy spent a
what
lot
you
of
knew
time
was
by
best for
himself."
you,
Because
whether or
people who
not
do
it
get
didn't really
really good
matter
at
which
something
opportunities were presented
have
to
to
you.
woodshed, have
You
to be
were
by
smart
themselves,
enough
and
and
there
wise
isn't
enough to
anything wrong with
explore
that
each
if you're
one
being
and just
productive,
go with
instead of just
whichever one felt genuine
and
to
we all
you. And I
get
think that's
down
something
and
that
depressed about the state of
cannot
the world
be
and in our
shared
lives from
enough,
time to
especially
time. But I
nowadays
think
when
that
there's
there's a
so much
necessary sort of
out
thing
there to
of
compare yourself to.
being on your own,
Again, kind of going back
that's
with what
really
you were saying,
healthy, and especially
spending
for
time with
artists
yourself,
too. It takes so much
understanding what
time
matters to
to
you, and
practice
being
obsessively,
unapologetic about it,
compulsively.
whether or not it has to
The
do with
things
a major
that you
label,
need to do
not a major
in
label,
order
doing your
to
own
improve
thing,
or
maybe
expand
doing it with the group,
your
being
art.
by
So
yourself.
that's, I
The list
guess,
goes on and on with the
more
examples. I
opinion.
think what you've said here today is very important because it needs to be said more often that I think we need to spend more time understanding who we are and what we want to do and why we want to do it. And it's perfectly fine if it takes a long time, if you figure it out tomorrow. And once you figure that out, your choices sort of become not easier, but they become clear, in my opinion. As I would argue with your life and your career, it seems to me like you've bounced around quite a bit, but you've always kind of sort of known what you needed to do. And here you are today. You're a man who writes books. You're a professor. You're a man of literature. You're a music man. You're about to release new music, if I'm not mistaken. You're getting scouted by some cool people. Like, I like your story, is what I'm saying. And I think when I was talking about icons earlier, I think it's very, and again, this is kind of rambling a little bit, but I just want to tie it in that I think it's easy just to sort of see what's been presented in front of you as a packaged thing. Like, here's happiness, here's blah, 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 blah. But more often than not, you find true happiness with yourself, spending time with yourself, and then being brave enough to express what's genuinely inside of you in your music, in your art. And that's when you experience that ultimate success, in my opinion, is when you've kind of been able to mesh both. And yes, you can bring in labels and you can bring in people to help you create that vision, but that happiness, the success absolutely starts with you, with that genuine honesty. And I think that's something that is very clear with your career, in my opinion. Oh, of course. I appreciate that, man. So let me ask you this to kind of end things here on a high note. Let me know a little bit. So, what are some of the new stuff that you've got going on? I believe you have some new music that you're working on. And last we talked, I know you had a show working on, but that was a couple months ago. Catch me up a little bit about what's new
Very
with your
true.
music.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it's not to say that it doesn't have a dark side, and then that there's been a certain monomania wherein people have gotten hurt along the way. As a result of me having a kind of not just monomania, but a kind of myopia, just a tunnel vision of going. I'm going to pursue this. No matter the consequences, and on to a certain extent, not necessarily too diabolical. I hope. But yeah, I think that sums it up. You did it nicely. There you go. Brilliant. Kudos to you, Eddie. Yeah, sure. We have we have a new record that is coming in late February or early March. It was supposed to be out in January 2020, but it got pushed back a little bit because of scheduling things. It's called Brilliant Failures. It's on a label out of Germany called A Turntable Friend. They also operate out of Liverpool as well. So we've got Europe covered, and they have wonderful distribution, and they're doing vinyl with a swirly purple and white, record and CDs. And we feel as though, even though with a caveat, the bands always think the latest thing they did is their best. This record called Brilliant Failures is one about which we're incredibly excited. This summer we released a best of compilation called 31 Years of Obscurity, and a new record called Magic Johnson, and also a USB stick, which is, something for me. I'm kind of a Luddite. I still have a flip phone, and I listen to music on vinyl and CDs. But this record label out of Ohio called Atom, ATOM Records.com. They released everything we've ever done on a USB stick, with a beautiful booklet with, essays that I wrote about each of the records and told the story behind all 17 plus of them. So you can get everything we ever done for a really good price on a USB stick. And
awesome, man.
It
sounds like you guys are finally completing a very long vision.
Plastic,
and I honestly wish you guys the best, because I love your story, man. And I love the backstory of moving out here and
really
the endeavors that you've gone through to actually get to where you are. It just goes to show sometimes you don't know where your life could lead. But again, kind of going back with what we were talking about earlier,
going on.
It's just about being honest with yourself, being open to those experiences, and really just doing what's right for you. And that's oversimplifying it, but I honestly think it shows in your life. And so thank you, man. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. It was a true pleasure.
I'm talking to you from the studio, Rob Campanella's studio, where we're doing a new EP with a really crazy New Order-ish kind of dance song included there. So we just don't know how to stop. Keep on pursuing, trying to stretch our imaginations and our budget. So there you go. There's the upbeat note of everything that's going on with the Black Watch. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Eddie. I'm going to get back downstairs to the studio and hear what the mixes are. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for having me on Nebula.
I hope you enjoyed the interview, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation that we had about basically just history, like I mentioned earlier. To me, it was very fascinating to be able to speak to someone who's been around the industry for so long, and clearly very insightful. Clearly, John knows exactly what he's talking about. And I am very, very excited to see what he does next in his career, because I guarantee you there's some really cool big stuff coming their way, and I can't wait to see how that evolves. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on any podcasting platform. This show is absolutely everywhere. You can find it wherever you listen to shows. Because I do this as much as I can, I bring on some of the coolest musicians on the show and just pick their brain. Honestly, that's the goal of the show. It has always been the goal, is to just explore their creative minds and see where the conversations go. And if those conversations help you get inspired to pursue your music career, then I know that I've definitely done my job. So definitely stay tuned, because there's lots of great content coming your way.